Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Jasmine Singer.
And this is Marianne Sullivan.
And thanks so much for joining us for this week's show. Marianne's guest this week is Nancy Lawson, who is the author of The Humane Gardener, Nurturing a Backyard Habitat for Wildlife. And she's going to be talking about, well, just that, actually. And if you love to garden, or if, like me, you like to think about gardening without actually doing anything, then this idea that our yards and even our flower pots can not only be beautiful and not only produce food, but can actually be creating habitat is so vitally important and really undervalued in the gardening world. So this is an interview that will really expand your horizons of what a garden can be.
Yes, as you know from my past complaints, perhaps, if you have been listening to the podcast, I really struggle with non-theoretical gardening. That is like gardening that doesn't have to do with reading a book about gardening or listening to a podcast about gardening, but actually dealing with dirt and plants and all of that. But I really do love this idea that gardens can be or should be, and that's what we should be focusing on, habitat. I mean, I want my little yard to be full of insects and birds and even my one woodchuck and or there might be more than one in there. I don't know. I've only ever seen one. So I love this idea. I really hope it will make me a little bit more talented about actually doing it.
But can I ask you one quick thing, though?
Yeah.
How much wood does a woodchuck chuck?
Well, we don't really know if a woodchuck could chuck wood, so I can't really answer that.
Oh my God. It's gotten real here, folks. Well, that's true. But anyway,
pathetic.
That was
I'll
really
also
pathetic.
be here later with Rising Anxieties, which will be much funnier than that joke.
Oh, good.
Is that a joke? I'm not sure.
No, it was like it was like theoretical gardening. It was neither here nor there. Anyway, I'm also excited because on the bonus segment, which is available to all Flock members, Marianne will be continuing her conversation with Nancy. So if you're a member of the Flock, you'll get an email on Tuesday, the Tuesday after this episode goes up, with a link, or you can find it on the Flock Facebook page. And if you're not a member of the Flock, you can join for $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate. And while we're on the subject, please don't forget to support our sponsors.
Yes, supporting our sponsors is, of course, another way you can support our hen house. The best way to support us is, of course, to donate. And if you can't afford to become a Flock member, please give what you can, what you're comfortable with. We would really, no matter how much it is, we deeply, deeply appreciate it. So before we get to the interview, I just want to talk about a few crazy things that happened this week. I'm not sure they're crazy, but it just seemed a week ripe for like really stupid conversations. I know as vegans, like our entire lives are full of stupid conversations, but I had a few really special ones this week. There was the one I had, I was at the gym. Yes, I am a perfect person. I went to the gym and I was having a conversation with a couple of people I knew, kind of. And then this one person I hadn't met at all. And she mentioned she was from High Falls, which is a place in the Catskills. I guess it's in the Catskills or the Hudson Valley. I'm not sure which. And I mentioned, since I like to work these things into whatever conversation I can, that's where Woodstock Farm Animal Sanctuary is. And she said, oh, yes, that's really near me. And I really wanted to volunteer there, but then I found out they won't let you bring meat for lunch.
What?
Like, I swear to God, that's what she said.
Oh my God. That's horrible.
Like, what does she think? Like, she wasn't even saying she wasn't even under the impression that they require you to be vegan in your life. She just wanted to bring dead animals to the sanctuary for lunch while she's of course she didn't want to volunteer. It was just
right.
It was just bullshit. She didn't have any interest in volunteering. But like, is that the stupidest lie you've heard this week?
That's really bad. Well, no, I mean, it kind of is sadly not the stupidest thing I've heard all week, but it's pretty stupid and unfortunate, I guess. But
I did use it as an opportunity. I didn't confront her in the moment because it just didn't feel right. She was a stranger, and these other two people, they're not vegan. I don't know. It just didn't feel right. But I did talk to the other people later and kind of made fun of her. So I did, and how ridiculous that was. So I did kind of use the opportunity, but
well, that's depressing. And one of the things that I'm trying to do to kind of get out of the depressing mindset is while you're at the gym, I'm watching Queer Eye. So that's what I'm doing as my workout.
Yeah, I actually started watching the new season, which is better than last season's. I thought was excessive. I don't even remember what I didn't like about it. I think it was really preachy. I don't know. But the first, I watched a couple of episodes of the next season. It's, it's got the usual problems, but I do like it.
Yes, but I always fast forward through the food section.
Yeah, that's the usual problem as far as I'm concerned. Like that guy, I don't remember what his name is, but A, he can't cook. His food is just not interesting at all. But B, like there's animal products in absolutely every single thing. If there isn't an animal product in the recipe, he'll find one and put it in.
Yeah, well, so I always fast forward through that part. And I know that there are vegans who watch things like that and just sort of veganize it in their head, which I think is cool. Like I've tried to do that at times. And, maybe it's because I'm not a cook, so I'm not looking at it from like a perspective of, a challenge. I'm more like just sort of watching it as food porn. And there's no food porn for me. And any kind of animal products obviously being cooked. I'm sure all of you would agree with that. But I was watching this episode recently and I was telling you about it. You hadn't seen it yet. I think it's the last episode of the season. And, in the beginning of each show, the Fab Five, the five guys are in the car discussing where they're going. And they were talking about how they were going to visit this guy who used to be a dairy farmer. And his dairy farm has failed. And one of the guys...
Did they celebrate?
Well, one of the guys said that's because, so much dairy is being replaced by by plant-based milks and by almonds and other types of milks. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. But the episode went downhill from there because I thought it was just like an FYI thing. And instead, it wound up being a whole episode basically glorifying dairy. Now, let me pause for a second and just say that this guy was like the most homophobic person I think they've ever had on the show.
You mean the dairy farmer?
Right. Which clearly the producers...
Or the ex-dairy farmer.
Right. Which clearly the producers did like as an intentional choice because how, radical would it be to put this like homophobe on the air with these five gay guys? And he just kept saying repeatedly, I'm going to say at least 5 or 6 times in the episode, I haven't had one gay guy in my house, let alone 5. I mean,
that's good. I'm glad he came across as an idiot. Do you think this was bought and paid for by the industry?
Oh, yeah. Just wait. So this is going on. And basically, like, the project that they create around this episode is to, like, create, like, a farm-to-table dinner that this ex-dairy farmer is going to have for his community. And they're, as I said, glorifying dairy so much at one point they go to visit these baby cows who are 1 day old. And all of these babies are in these little enclosures, and they are obviously ridiculously adorable. And I know that fact that I just said they're ridiculously adorable is where it begins and ends, both for the Fab Five as well as for the viewers, most of the viewers who are like, oh, look at the cute little baby cow. And meanwhile, like the joke in that scene was that a couple of the little calves were trying to suckle on the face of one of the Fab Five, Bobby. And it was like funny, like, oh, ha, 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 Bobby, your face. You idiots. They're looking for their mama. They want to suckle on their mama.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like that level of insensitivity.
Yeah, it was...
Well, I guess it's not unbelievable.
It was
we
egregious.
see it every day, but wow.
So then the guy who makes the food...
That's just such an attempt to normalize the abusive practices
for sure.
of dairy.
So
like,
they were
cute.
They were talking about how they were going to make, for this meal for the community, they were going to make a butternut squash soup. So I leave it on before forwarding it because I'm thinking, oh, maybe it'll be vegan because butternut squash soup very frequently is. And they actually say, but we're going to add in dairy, like a lot of dairy. We're going to bring dairy back. And I was like, okay, rising anxieties, slow your roll. And so then at the end, there's the scene where he's feeding the community and he once again makes the joke that he's never had one gay guy in his house, let alone 5. And everyone laughs and they laugh and they laugh. And then they eat the like pus and blood filled soup. as their amuse-bouche.
Wow,
And
that's really horrifying.
yeah, it was. I was surprised.
The only
but yes.
thing that I'm going to take away from that, trying, in our indefatigably positive strategy, is it ain't going to work. I mean, it does sound like it was bought and paid for. And if the best thing the dairy industry can do is characterize themselves as a charity case, that people should buy it because, like, these homophobic farmers, not that they're all homophobic, I don't know whether they are or not, but are going broke, that's a pretty pathetic sales pitch.
I have a positive.
Like, people
spin.
want plant-based milks, but you should buy dairy because these people are pathetic.
Right, but
that's the worst sales pitch I've ever heard.
I have a positive spin on it too, and I told you about this when I first saw it, which is one that, like, kind of the only this is making your point, but the only point in this episode was at the beginning where they said that dairy is going down and it's being replaced by alternatives.
Yeah.
Period.
And that's
full
exactly
stop.
what's happening.
The rest
and
of the show,
stop it.
The rest of the show was a reaction to that statement. So, hearkening back to my conversation with you last week, I was on the Amtrak train going from Chicago to LA, and I was horrified because I was passing all these pastures with beef cows, and then I was having conversations with people in the dining car about dairy and meat, and it was really sad and I was really depressed, but there were vegan options for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on Amtrak. So that's just the fact. That's just the future.
No,
and the rest of it is just
going
filler.
to fight very, very hard to hold on, but it is the past.
Yeah.
Or will
Absolutely.
soon be.
Okay.
All right, I have one more stupid conversation. Can I tell you about it?
Yeah.
Or should we? All right.
No, do it.
All right. So I was at this musical performance, and you sat at tables, and they actually served dinner. I wasn't having dinner, but the other people, and really nice people I was chatting with. And there was a Beyond Burger on the menu. And this is at Bard College. They have a summer event there. And so the person is ordering and says, including me in the conversation, it's really unbelievable that this Beyond Burger is vegan and yet it uses GMOs. And I was like, okay, I don't even have to start these conversations anymore. Other people are starting them for me. And so I was like thinking to myself, I don't think the Beyond Burger uses GMOs or has GMO. I think they're non-GMO. But, because I'm never sure of my facts, I look it up on my phone. Thank God for phones. And, in 2.5 seconds, I was like, no, actually Beyond Burgers, no GMOs. And I said, maybe, is this an Impossible Burger or a Beyond Burger? Not that I think the Impossible Burger uses GMOs. I'm just curious. And he said, no, it's Beyond Burger. But they have this thing in it called heme. And I said, oh, no, that's the Impossible Burger. And so he goes in this whole thing about the heme, which is this like this ingredient that Impossible Burger uses, which I don't know whether it's GMO or not, but whatever, what the hell. And I said, well, this is the Beyond Burger, and the woman is who's with him is chiming in like, oh, maybe it's like because of the Roundup, that insecticide where they have to modify the plant. I'm like, what are you people talking about? Why have you picked this one food item? And they were really nice. And I actually said, GMOs are not really a big issue for me. It's not nearly as bad as meat. And he agreed with me. And though I don't think they were vegan, he was just nice. But of all the things on this menu, which I'm sure all use the same like insecticides and like enormous quantities of the American diet, like are use genetically modified ingredients. No, they are picking out the Beyond Burger as the one thing, which, is completely inaccurate, that uses GMOs. And, what does that become? It becomes an excuse not to like, and this is the result of propaganda, like, where did they hear this shit? But all of a sudden, like, vegan food is being associated with GMOs, whereas GMOs are like everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that tracks. There's just, I think that like as veganism continues to grow, especially with like the Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, we're going to get more and more rising anxieties. We're going to get more and more shows like Queer Eye who are being like bought by the dairy industry, that episode of it. We're going to get more and more
More and more crazy reasons, like, oh, we should feel sorry for these homophobic dairy farmers. Oh, well, she won't let me eat meat while I'm taking care of farm animals. Oh, well, vegan food has GMOs. Like, just crazy reasons for not having to care about animals.
But then ultimately, we will be winning. I mean, these are all signs that we're winning. I mean, these are also, it's just like the Amtrak story. It's just like the story
crazy excuses. Crazy excuses are definitely a sign that you're winning. They just don't have any good excuses.
Well, I would love to transition to chat with Nancy, because I know that you love watching your birds and your bird in your bird feeder, and I know that you love creating habitats for animals.
Theoretically.
Oh, by the way, can I just say that I just won a huge thing?
Yes, you can, though I think that we're transitioning into a whole new
No,
topic.
it's related. Because I am also creating a habitat for animals, but on my arm. I'm getting a new tattoo because I won.
That is as pathetic an
I won a new
for getting a tattoo.
Hold on. I have
just
never
admit you won. You have not created habitat. You've created a habitat for ink animals.
Ink animals, but they will be standing for real animals. And I won a drawing, the first one I've ever won in my life, and it was a big one at Bestie's Vegan Paradise, which is my local vegan grocery store here in LA, which I'm completely obsessed with. Besties. I entered a drawing and won, and to win a $900 tattoo made by vegan tattoo artist Asia Rain. You should look her up on Instagram and follow her. It's Asia Rain. She's so good. And a $99 gift card to Besties, which I used promptly that day. And Asia is designing the tattoo for me, but let's just say it will include subway rats and the subway. Because Anyway, all right, we can transition now. I just needed to tell you that.
Yes, that's enough of that.
Okay, I like it how you sigh every now and then and you don't even notice you do it, and it's okay. So I'll take your sigh as a cue that we should transition to your interview with Nancy Lawson, who, as I mentioned, is the author of The Humane Gardener and who is also a columnist for All Animals magazine and the creator of the award-winning website humanegardener.com. A frequent speaker on garden ecology, she founded Humane Gardener to pioneer and promote animal-friendly landscaping methods. So she and Marianne will be here right after this. This episode of the Our Hen House podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. That's help, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp. I am so excited about this sponsorship, by the way. It's an entire platform that is dedicated to helping those of us for whom there is something interfering with our happiness or preventing us from achieving our goals.
I would say that probably applies to anybody listening to this podcast, because knowing the truth about animal agriculture definitely interferes with your happiness.
Well, that's why I'm excited to use BetterHelp, and I'm personally about to start using it, so I'll keep you posted on how it goes.
It's not for any particular kind of issue. It could relate to the agony you feel because of animals. It could relate to personal issues.
BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist, and you can start communicating in under 24 hours, which is great. It's important to note that it's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. It's all online, and that's great for me because I'm super busy and I don't have time to just be going to find all of these people in various corners of the town I'm in.
Finding a counselor or a therapist is always such a hard job, and I think this really takes some of the angst out of it. There's a really broad range of expertise in their counselor network, and that, for a lot of people, that broad range is not available locally, and it's really available for anybody worldwide. So that is a huge advantage.
I'm really excited about BetterHelp specifically because of the fact that they always offer timely and thoughtful responses, and you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, which I know you would appreciate, Marianne, because you hate the video sessions for anything.
Yeah, I like to maintain as much distance between me and other humans as possible. Maybe that could be a subject of therapy.
Maybe you need to start to, you have to contact BetterHelp immediately. It's actually committed to facilitating some really great therapeutic matches, so I bet they could find someone perfect for you.
Yes, it's a stretch, but out there is somewhere.
Well, There's got to be someone, and they do make it free of charge to change counselors if you need to.
Another thing I really like is that you can log in anytime and send a message, which, you can do with regular therapists, but I always feel a little uncomfortable about it. But this is part of the service. And obviously it's not as expensive as traditional offline counseling. Actually, it says, from what they told us, financial aid is available. I'm not sure what the standards are for that, but it's nice to know that it's available. And, I think that their whole goal is to help people start living happier lives.
Which is
right away.
Great. Because if we're an animal advocate and you're listening to our hen house, you know that hope is a strategy and that sometimes life gets you down. And if you visit betterhelp.com, and again, it's HELP, betterhelp.com/henhouse. Again, it's betterhelp.com/henhouse. You can join the over 500,000 people who are also taking charge of their mental health, along with me, with the experience of a professional therapist to help you along. So there is this amazing special offer that they have going on for our hen house listeners right now, which is that if you go to betterhelp.com/henhouse, you will get 10% off your first month. So join me in getting some better help.
Welcome to our hen house, Nancy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. There's a lot of reasons I want you here. I think this is a subject that a lot of people don't know a lot about, even if they care about animals. And it's also without making this all about me, I somehow ended up living in a place where I have maybe an acre of land that I've lived in the city virtually my whole life. I grew up in the suburbs, didn't have anything. I don't know what I'm doing. So I want this to be all about me.
That's a typical question that I get. So that's
okay, good. Yeah. And I really feel like I don't know what I do. And I've read your book, what I'm doing, and I've read your book, and it's very reassuring that, it kind of takes care of itself in a lot of ways if you have the right attitude. So I'm hoping that that's how this comes out. But you really make it clear in your book that if you care about animals, you need to care about plants. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, animals by and large are plant-based too. So, of course we have the obligate carnivores that we know about and appreciate. But for example, most insects, like 90% of plant-eating insects, actually rely on certain plants that are indigenous to your region, and there are birds who rely on those insects to feed their young. Most terrestrial birds need caterpillars, who in turn need native plants. And so if you're going to, say, Home Depot and buying a petunia, you're not supporting a whole bunch of the species that are visiting your backyard. And so that's why it's not only important to care about plants, but to care about the plants that have evolved with the wildlife in your area.
And so one of the things that I heard you say once that I really liked is that the way most of people talk about gardening and understand gardening is similar to factory farming, which is really, and when I first moved here and I had, I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I did hire a garden consultant. She was very nice, but she mentioned that gardeners really have to be ruthless. And I was like, because I'm just not ruthless, I want everybody to live. I look at the weeds and I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to kill it, And I thought that's troubling. And it does seem like there's a lot of warlike attitudes to gardening. What's wrong with these? Well, maybe some of them are right and some of them are wrong. But how do you liken gardening to factory farming and other things that are harmful to animals?
Yeah, well, so there is the marketing of it, as you're mentioning. So there's two things: the marketing of it, and then there's the supply chain. So the marketing of plants and of your quote unquote backyard paradise usually revolves around very militaristic type of language, such as plants being messy if they drop their leaves, or if you have dead wood, which is actually very important to wildlife, like tree snags or stumps, or lining your garden beds with logs and things like that. That's seen as a sort of debris, and most people, grind it up and haul it away. Overgrown is another one. People use a lot to describe plants that or landscapes that are a little bit more natural, that aren't all turf grass, which is the dominant plant in the country. It covers more than 42 million acres. It's the number one irrigated crop. And then the animals are subject to these terms as well. They're often called pests and nuisances. And if you look at some of the pesticides and some of the products that are used to eliminate them from your space, a lot of those labels will show, shiny, happy people and roses and things like that, in the same way that we see, happy hens in ads for eggs. And then the supply chain issue is really important. So, having worked at the Humane Society of the U.S. for about 17 years, I saw the transformation that our factory farming campaign made from the very start, when they first got off the ground. And now I go to a restaurant and my brother is telling me to try his Impossible Burger, and he's not even vegetarian, and he's like spreading the gospel because it's in every restaurant that he goes to now practically. And it's not the same for plants. So I think it could be, and it should be, and there are some people working on that. But plants are basically mass produced, and Home Depot, Lowe's, the major nursery, or the major places that sell plants, not even nurseries anymore, but hardware stores, home improvement stores, they only sell a very limited number of plants, and often you'll find the same ones around the country. And the problem is that many of those plants are the kind that are not from here, and they don't have any natural controls, any natural insects who keep them in check and things like that. And so they spread into wildlife habitat. They escape from gardens and become invasive. But they're easy to grow, and they're easy to spread en masse. And so these high volume stores will order these things and then sell them around the country. And so in that way, a lot of places want to do something different, a lot of these smaller nurseries. But when you go and you ask for native plants, they'll tell you there's not enough consumer demand. I think that's where there's another similarity with factory farming, because these plants are treated as products, as commodities, and it starts with the growers, and then there are the distributors, and then there are the direct to consumer retailers. And those nurseries often they can't afford to sell the plants that are best for our local wildlife if no one's buying them. So that's a big bridge to cross, but it felt impossible at first when we were doing it with some of the suppliers and restaurants, cafeterias, and things with the factory farming campaign. So I know it can be done.
Well, I hadn't really thought of that, the difficulty for the nurseries. Fortunately, I mean, you can find some native plants just growing in your yard, but I was kind of shocked to find out how many plants that were growing. I mean, I'm pretty old, and the plants that I grew up with, I started looking them up, and I have some of them on my property now, and they're all from Asia. I don't know, like forsythia. Well, maybe not forsythia. It may not be from Asia, but it's certainly not from here. And
right.
So, what are a few other plants that beloved plants that people have that really are from far away?
So there's some beloved ones that aren't necessarily invasive, like rhododendrons, azaleas.
I think it's important to draw that line between invasive non-natives and I should have asked that first. Let's do that, because some of them you have to yank out, and you do have to be ruthless, but a lot of them you can still let them be. So you just draw that line?
Yeah. So there are some non-native plants that have been shown over many years to not escape gardens and start invading natural areas, parks, and whatever else happens to be around in the community. But that said, I mean, there are plants that have been quote unquote tame garden plants for like 60 years. So here in the East, we are having a problem with Leicester celandine, which was a tame garden plant for that long. And now it just completely covers the parks and the natural areas in the spring, and to the point where it suppresses the spring ephemerals and the things that the little native bees rely on, and other animals. So you can have a plant that isn't harmful, but it doesn't mean it won't be in the future, which is why I still encourage people, when you're planting something new, just to choose a native plant. You can't go wrong.
Well, and also the native plants, even if the non-natives are not invasive, they're just not as friendly to the animals. Is that right? As a native plant.
Exactly. So native plants attract a huge number of butterfly and moth caterpillars, and they most of them they really can't eat anything else except plants from certain lineages that they've evolved with, and that's important both to the butterflies and the moths, but also to the animals who eat the caterpillars, like I mentioned. 96% of terrestrial bird species in North America feed almost exclusively, they feed spiders and insects exclusively, but most of those insects are caterpillars because they're nice and gushy like baby food. And so they really rely on us to have those native plants that have the insect life that they can eat. And then there are specialist bees who also can only get pollen from certain plants that they've evolved with. And so, like violets, for example, people take out violets all the time. They poison them. They mow over them. There's a violet miner bee that provisions her nests with pollen only from violets. Oh. And there's specialist bees for asters and dogwoods and goldenrods. And in the Southwest, there's a high number of them because they've evolved with the cacti. And so it's and this has effects up the food chain because a lot more than birds eat insects, of course, snakes and turtles and frogs and mammals. People don't realize squirrels, foxes, bears also eat a fair number of insects. And insects themselves, I mean, it's not just about the fact that, they're prey. I mean, the insects are wonderful creatures and fascinating in their own right. And just there's a whole world of discovery waiting for you if you start to nurture these plants that draw them. I mean, they're just amazing little animals. And a lot of people don't even think of them as animals, which always surprises me.
Yeah, I think that all of this has been very surprising to me. And I imagine, you're so used to all of this, that it's hard to imagine how shocking it is to realize how important it is that we have native plants for animals. And it's not even, like, as you say, they've evolved to depend on these particular plants, which we're just, eradicating in favor of rhododendron or whatever, forsythia. But this is very specific to very specific areas of the country, isn't it? Like what's native in, we don't live that far apart. I'm in upstate New York, and you're, I believe, in the mid-Atlantic, like near DC, maybe.
Right, in Maryland, yeah.
And we probably have very different insects that, and when you go to the Southwest, I remember reading one of the people in your book, the variations can be by mile and so it's so important to be planting these native plants instead of the nonsense we're getting from a Home Depot.
Yeah, well, and in New York, I'm glad you mentioned that because, up there and in places in the Midwest, there's the lupin, and there's a butterfly, the Carner blue, that relies on the lupin. and at the caterpillar stage. And one of the issues has been that people are buying a lupin that's native, I think, out west. And the caterpillar of the Karner blue butterfly can't lay their eggs on that. And it hybridizes, though, with the native lupin here in the East. And so then you're creating this problem, even though they're very similar plants.
We're running the risk, too, of what always happens to me with gardening is that I get overwhelmed in 2.5 seconds. Like, I want to be good at it. And then I'm like, oh my God, I can never. But one of the things I loved about your work is that what you're saying is it's really not that, like, you should let go. Like, it's not that much work. Like, the less work you do, in a way, the better. Even though, I guess, if you really want to be good at it, there's a lot to know. To some extent, it's just a matter of getting rid of the really bad stuff. That's a good place to start. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And also learning who's around you and learning to identify what's already there. And for me, that's the most exciting part because, as you mentioned earlier, there are always going to be native plants in the seed bank. If you stop mowing even a little patch just to see what comes up, you'll get some invasive plants, but you'll also start to see these neat little things that you've never seen before. What's ironic is that we don't really know our native plants because, we've been changing the habitat so much for so many years that there's always new ones to discover. And I think that that's what's really important for people to understand, because it can get overwhelming and frustrating if you're just focusing on taking plants out. And like you said, we love everything. We want things to live. So, for example, yesterday I was working along our fence line between us and the neighbors, and we have some stuff that continually suckered there from previous Bradford pears that had been planted by the previous owners, and that in turn seemed to invite all these other invasive plants. And we don't like to cut those things down at certain times of year because there's still animals nesting in them and using them. And, that's really important too. Like if you take this sort of all or nothing attitude, you could harm creatures already living there. And so it's actually preferable just to do it little by little. And when I was doing that yesterday, just taking one little fence panel at a time, I found like native sensitive ferns, native dogwoods, and what else? There were, great blue lobelia, which is a really pretty wildflower that certain bees like in the middle of the summer. And I didn't plant any of those, so they were sort of just being nursed along in the shadow of these things that aren't as helpful to wildlife, but they were there. And so now I get to have them for free.
That is exciting. And it is a strong goal of mine to be able to identify more, which is actually kind of hard to do. I have recently started to let some of my grass, you call it turf grass, which I guess you mean by grass that's mown, the just like what everything is, like mown grass that we see everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I did start to let some of it grow. Immediately, a lot of people talk to me about ticks. So how scary is it to let your grass grow? Like everybody, I mean, around where I am, people are terrified of Lyme disease, and with good reason. I mean, there's plenty of it around here. So how much of a hazard is that?
So it's a good question. I mean, when you create a space that has more balance, you start to notice that a lot of these things that people have problems with are not as much of a problem when you've got the predators and the prey. And so with ticks, people, as you know, blame deer, but the white-footed mouse is really what's transferring the bacteria that cause the infection and or carrying the ticks at that stage. And so if you don't have the predators of the mice, if you don't have habitat to attract the owls and the hawks and the foxes, then you are going to have an abundance of them. And so, for our back field where we let the grasses grow and we got native grasses coming in, we also have some invasive grasses back there that we sort of trim down sometimes. We have paths through there so that you can walk through and you don't have to go, in the thick of the grasses. But it's not an issue for us here, the ticks, because we have so many insect eaters. Birds eat ticks, and also a lot of other creatures besides mice and deer carry the ticks. Birds do, other small mammals, and so that's just something to note for people who want to kill all the deer because they think they're the cause of Lyme disease. It's a much more complicated issue than that.
How do you find out who's living on your land? Like, I know, I notice in the winter there's a pond. I have a pond. I mean, I have a small piece of land, but it happens to have this like a natural pond attached to it. And in the winter, there's like all these tracks across, and I'm like, who are these creatures who I never see?
Yeah, there's a few things. If it's an insect, there's a great site called bugguide.net, and you can easily just sign up and then upload your images, and they have scientists and other experts who can help, as long as you take good enough pictures, help identify or verify your guesses. And then iNaturalist is really fun because it's a crowdsourcing type thing. So there's a lot of people who will take pictures in their gardens, in the woods, of animals and plants at different stages. And then there's also people on there who will confirm your identification guesses. And also, if you just have no idea where to start, so you can't even make a guess on those sites, you can go to some of the identification groups on Facebook. And so there's ones for plants, and then there's ones for bees, and beetles and spiders. You can pretty much find everything there.
What should we do with the non-native plants that are already there that we find out, or if we find out they're invasive? I had something called bull thistle, and I thought they were kind of pretty, and then I had 20 of them, and I thought, oh, they better go. And I found out they were very invasive. I also have 2 enormous, beautiful Norway maples in my yard, which I was distressed to find out everybody hates. Yeah. So, and now I walk around town, and all I see are Norway maples, and it's just depressing that I now know that they're evil. So I don't have to cut those trees down, do I?
I still have a Norway maple, and they're so problematic because they seed everywhere. And so do native maples, but these have the potential to do it in natural areas. I don't want mine either, but when we were first here, it was one of the only trees. And so I didn't want to take away what little the animals had to use. So I would just recommend a gradual approach. If you eventually have enough, and you can take it down or turn it into a snag. So that's one of the things that we did with a couple of the invasive trees that we had so far. You cut off the limbs, and you can cut the trunk down. You can leave it all, or you can cut it down to like 12 feet. And a tree snag is a wonderful thing for all kinds of creatures, because the beetles go and start boring holes, and then the bees, the wood nesting bees, can make combs in there, and the woodpeckers come and they find food, and then they make their primary cavity nesters, and so then they make a cavity that other birds come and use in successive years. And of course, eventually if you get a big enough hole, you can have mammals in there and raccoons. And so a tree snag has just as much life in it as a live tree, sometimes more even. So if you could do that, that would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, that would be hard for me. And I think this is an issue for a lot of people. I don't really live in a suburban area, but I kind of live in town, and my Norway maples are beautiful, and they're right in the front of my house. I think if I turned them into dead trees, people would think she's even weirder than we thought she was. So that's a problem too, isn't it? Like people finding a balance between how a yard should look and how we want our yards to be life nourishing.
Yes. And in that example, yeah, it might be a problem if it's right in the front. There are ways to make it pretty by growing. I have a friend actually who lives in a pretty urban place. Mine's a little bit more rural, but she's right near Baltimore. And she's got a snag that she's growing a coral honeysuckle vine up, which is a beautiful native with red flowers that hummingbirds love. And it looks so cool. You know, I don't think anyone would be unhappy with that because of it almost looks like a natural trellis. But yes, that is definitely an issue, and there are a number of sort of landscape design strategies to use in your front yard if you have a neighborhood like that. One is to have like a mowed strip in front of your jungle so that people think that it's, outlined and neat. Another is to have, sort of strips of flowers that they recognize. That can be native flowers, but short kind of blooms that people think are pretty. They call them in the landscape design world cues to care. And so it just shows that there's signs of human intention there, like putting a bird bath or a birdhouse or outlining things a little bit, having mowed paths and things like that. It is important in the sense that, we want people to understand what we're doing and to actually want to do it themselves. And so you have to kind of make it look like something that's not scary or neglected. That said, really, there's so much value for wildlife in a messy place. And so if you can have areas that are just fallen leaves and stalks left up for there's cavity nesting bees and things like that, leave that if it's behind a hedge or somewhere where your neighbors can't see, and then create these other more manicured spaces where they can.
It turns out gardening is so much more in tune with my natural sensibilities of being messy and just letting things happen, which is good. But it's kind of like being vegan, isn't it? You kind of have to find this balance between just doing what you feel is the right thing, but also finding a way to make it appealing to other people.
Yes,
and fit in. So helping animals is just this constant balance of trying to bring other people in as well. So what about bird feeders? Yes or no? Do I have to get rid of my bird feeder, which I'm looking at right at this moment with this beautiful bird? I mean, I must admit that even if it's not good for them, well, unless it's bad for them, I would miss it so much.
Yeah, no. Okay, so it's a really good question. So there's a few issues just to be aware of. It's not inherently bad, but if you're relying on just feeders or mainly feeders and you're not thinking about this animal-plant connection, then you're not giving them any food for their young. And so they're not, unless it's like very few birds feed seeds to their young. Goldfinches are a good example. So they're nesting more in midsummer because they're waiting for plants to go to seed. But that's not typical. So most of the birds are starting in the spring when the caterpillars are on those leaves. And so you really need to have both. It doesn't mean that having feeders is inherently bad, but I don't like when people just focus on that. Another thing with feeders is that it causes so much conflict with people and squirrels and people and coyotes and it can become a real battle for people because they think that those animals don't have a right to eat at their bird feeders.
I'm perfectly happy when the squirrel who lives in my Norway maple comes down and eats the bird food. That doesn't bother me. But yeah, a lot of people are nuts about it, like they're stealing it.
Yes, and I mean, there's people who even shoot squirrels for that. I mean, it is ridiculous, and Squirrels are just amazing. Like, I've been watching them for the last few weeks eating the maple seeds. And, that's what they love. They love the seeds. And so you have to have stuff for them too. And honestly, when we have had bird feeders up in the winter and deep snow, as sometimes we'll put it up, the squirrels are going to the seed heads. It's really interesting. They don't tend to go to feeders. So, and then the other thing is that, so hummingbird feeders, I just did an article for All Animals magazine on this, and because I get that question a lot, and about hummingbird feeders, is it good or bad? And there's just, it's just starting to be studied, but there's questions about, does it have the same type of nutrients as a flower? It's sugar water. So, in that way too, it's, there's these parallels to our industrial food system, where, we're just sort of simplifying things when we do that. And, they might be getting proteins and other nutrients from those flowers, and insects, which the hummingbirds actually need when they visit the flowers. And the hummingbird feeders can also cause more birds to visit than they naturally would congregate together. And then that can possibly help spread infection. Yeah. And so, and there's another study that was done showing that when you have a lot of feeders, they're not actually going to pollinate the plants. And a lot of native plants rely on hummingbirds for pollination. And so there's all these relationships that we're sort of not attending to when we put out candy bars for animals. And that's not to say that you should take them down. If you're already doing it, it's actually, they may have come to rely on it. And there's just not enough known about it to say definitively, this is helpful or this is harmful. But we do know that plants are best.
That's a really good way to answer that it's not that you have to take them down, which I think would break a lot of people's hearts, but focus on growing those plants that maybe you're not going to be able to watch them as much and you won't feel as personally connected, but you're actually doing them more good by growing the plants that they love.
Right.
So I'm going to have to let you go. So before I do, I just tell us about your book, which I highly recommend for anybody who's doing any kind of gardening, and also about some other ways. You mentioned a few resources, but any other ways that people can find specifically about your work?
Yeah. So my book is, it covers a lot of the themes we just talked about. It's divided into 6 chapters with the idea of showing sort of the universal themes no matter where you live in the country. So having dead wood, resolving conflicts humanely. So there's a lot of mammals people get upset with and do horrible things to. So there's ways to prevent that and resolve that. And then planting for these sort of specialist insects and things like that. And each chapter, I profile someone in a different part of the country, just to show that this can be done anywhere, and it can be done in big and small spaces. It can even be done on a balcony. There's some wonderful native plants that come back year after year in pots, and you'll draw those hummingbirds to them and native bees and such. And so, yeah, there's a lot more information on my website. I could only fit so much into the book, so I spent the next couple of years trying to put more on my site for people to get more information about how to do this and why it's important. And that's humanegardener.com. And then I also have at Humane Gardener as my social media on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And I have a lot of links in those places too, where you can look in your own location for plants. There are databases where you can look up by zip code for plants indigenous to your region.
Well, that's all. I mean, it's hugely helpful. It does lead me into this conflict I have with gardening about, well, I'm not going to call it gardening.